Hello, hello, everybody, and welcome to Tea with Halo. Or today we are Tea with Sara Mastros. This is the podcast of the Enchanted Academy. I am your host, Halo Quinn. I'm a pagan author, storyteller, and a teacher of modern day witchcraft and magic. And as such, I am absolutely fascinated by how other people both teach and learn magic and how together we can re-enchant the world. So to that end, I have decided to bring my tea and invite my guest to bring a drink of choice. And I love your mug. I'm
It was a
welcoming
gift from my younger brother. On the other side, it says original bad girl.
original bad girl. And for those listening,
Oh
it
yeah.
has the evil queen with a poisoned apple, and mine just very like commercially corporate, very corporate. I've got the T logo on mine because why not? Anyway, without further ado, Sara Mastros. Sara,
Hello, Halo. Thank you so much for
oh,
having me. And hello, audience. I'm so excited to nerd out about teaching and learning magic, which is literally my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm excited.
oh, absolutely. So, Sara, would you please introduce yourself and what it is that you do, magic speaking?
All right. Well, my name is Sara Mastros. I live in Pittsburgh in the States. I do a whole bunch of different things in terms of like things I do that people give me money for. I mostly write books and teach courses about witchcraft. I also do some individual consulting. So for me, a lot of times that's other magicians who are either like planning some big magic and want help in the like strategy side, or sadly, oftentimes people who maybe did not put a lot of effort into the strategy side and things went spectacularly wrong. And now I come in and solve those issues. But it would be better if they came in advance. As a small tip, I will say when we are cleaning things up, there are two kinds of people. One of them has beautiful, extensive notes that detail everything they did. And those are very easy to like fix what went wrong and like correct it. And then other people who I will admit I fall into the second category have no or very sloppy notes. They wrote beautiful notes about what they planned to do, but they did not write down what they actually did. And so there's a lot of reconstructing. So just as advice to everybody, I know we tell you this all the time that you should like write down your magic. And I will freely admit I am not always taking very good notes, but the most important piece of that is when something goes wrong. I know you think you'll remember what you did, but you will not because magic space time, it's like a dream, right? So like the exact details of it fade pretty quickly from memory. So that's most of what I do like for a living. I also do a lot of my own magic. These days I've been doing especially a lot of like Solomonic pentacle work, but I find I don't like to be like typecast when it comes to my magic. So I go through phases where I do a lot of one kind of magic, particularly because like I'm writing or teaching about that particular kind, and then I like change gears and do something different. Something that I think we don't talk about enough, but like, and it's changing a little bit as in like the Anglophone English speaking magical world. Like we start to move away from this, but for a long time, for the last like 30 or 40 years, almost everyone's exposure to that is coming through books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like that produces this really strong bias that's a little bit invisible. Like, I'm the kind of person who writes books, and you're the kind of person who writes books. But many people are not the kind of person who writes books. And they're like, it's not like being a magician requires you to be a big fucking nerd like us. But because like our magical culture is built out of books, it's got this real nerdy bias that is not present in antiquity. Like the overwhelming majority of our like witch and magician ancestors were fully illiterate. So I'm really excited about like breaking into like video and things where we get more like I mean, I don't know. It introduces a different bias. Like now the bias is for people who, admittedly, also like you and me, are like maybe into having a lot of people like, look at me, razzle dazzle, razzle dazzle. But like that is also not a necessary feature of being a magician. And so I feel like maybe we swung the other way. We're now like we're missing a lot of the like real quiet magic.
Yeah.
But I also think that the nature of teaching and writing means that like magic gets very siloed, right? So, like, when I'm writing about pentacles, I'm only really talking about that specific kind of magic. And I'm really only for that book or like for that course, I'm really researching that exact kind of magic. But the truth is, when I do magic for myself, it's almost always like a combination of lots of kinds of magic. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the teaching, right?
Yeah.
That like when we're teaching, we kind of silo it down into a specific topic because that's just the nature of teaching. But then people ask, like, tell us about a result with pentacles. But like, I have results with pentacles, but I also did 9 other kinds of magic, like connected in. And I don't know. My great hope is that like we move into this era where we get to talk more about like the weird magic that's like a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't always have to be like prim proper scholar magician.
I definitely think there's that. So I write books because I love books, and to me, like
Mm-hmm.
books are
Yeah,
magical
same.
things, right? Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was first looking for solid magical information, I went to the library, and
Exactly.
in my school library found a book that included ritual magic next to the Bible and the Usborne Book of
Nice.
Ghosts. Yeah. When I took it back, I then went to get it out again, and someone had quietly removed it from the library, and I never saw it again. So,
Sad. Should have
right.
stolen it.
Well, I did consider stealing it. And I'm such an honest person. It was the first time and probably the only time that I've seriously gone, or maybe the second time that I'd gone, like, maybe I want this so much, maybe I should keep it. And I thought about keeping it. And then I was like, no, I can't do
Mm-hmm.
that. And I took it back. And the reason I went to go and get it the second time was because I
Mm-hmm.
decided I was going to keep it. And then it wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
the
would
librarians kept me
never
honest,
advise
like,
people to steal from a
no,
library because I
no.
feel like that's different than stealing from like a bookstore where like I don't know, did Barnes and Noble get hurt? Questionable. But like a library, then other people don't get to read the book.
Right.
But
And
yeah, there are a
like
few books. There are a few books in my history that I also regret. I'm pretty sure that at the Cal when I was at Caltech, the California Institute of Technology, they had a copy of Austin Osman Spare's Book of Pleasure,
mhm.
which had like marginal notations in it. And now looking back, I'm pretty sure that was Jack Parsons' copy. And I
Ooh,
deeply regret not stealing that book.
yeah. But I too do not recommend stealing books from libraries. Like,
Right.
don't steal
That's
books from libraries. Let's just,
because then like all of us who were like teenagers, that's where
yeah,
we got them. And they need to still be there for the next
yeah.
generation. But
Like if I
chain bookstores, I go ahead and steal. That's
I
fine.
I cannot in good conscience condone stealing books from anywhere publicly. Is all I will say on the matter. But yeah, no,
I mean,
don't
that's reasonable.
right.
I feel
But
differently.
yeah, like right. Well, I'm being a good host. Um, so and an ethical public figure. This is my ethics. Like the but like I was 11 at the time, and it
Mm-hmm.
was this
Exactly.
amazing book that had magical rituals in it. I did find a copy 20
Mm-hmm.
years later for £5 in a
Yeah.
secondhand bookshop in Glastonbury, and it now
Exciting.
lives with me. And reading back through it, I was like, oh
That's
yeah, I
exciting.
remember
What book is
doing
it?
this. Psychic Explorer by Jonathan Kaner,
Nice.
who is an astrologer who wrote for like the Daily Mail, which, I'm saying it's here. Where's it gone?
Because you have your background blurred out, it's like you're like digging in the void.
I am digging the void. It's just like piles of fabric. I'll find it and I'll show you. But I found a copy that didn't have the ritual magic chapter in it. It had the first 6 chapters, but not the ritual magic chapter. Like you could get copies of that in other places, just like
Oh.
about astrology and about divination and about aromatherapy. But the 7th chapter in the big hardback was actually like putting it all together into ritual magic. And this goes back to what you were saying about the magic that we do when we're doing it practically is pulling on all of these threads. It's the astrology, it's the herbs, it's the timing and the place and the charms and all of those things. So what is it like when you sit down to strategically plan out some magic? Where do you start? Some weird magic that
I
isn't
actually
just
have a
yeah.
I have a 4-phase system. So this is what I teach in Introduction to Witchcraft, the first lesson of which is online, and I actually think this thing I'm about to say is in that first lesson. It's more or less in every lesson. Okay, so let me give some credit. This method is a problem-solving method developed by a person named Georg Polya, who is a philosopher of mathematics and mathematics education. If you, at least in the United States, you were almost certainly taught this method in like middle grade math, but you were taught it so bad for solving word problems, but you were taught it so badly, you're not even going to recognize it. Like it's taught just abjectly terrible. So you probably won't. But if you want to learn a couple more, Polya, Polya, the book is called How to Solve It, which is a book about solving math problems, but you don't really need to know math. But if you're a nerd, you will enjoy that book. But it is a 4-phase system. And the first one, which honestly I feel like in mathematics as well as in magic, people are inclined to skip, is understand the problem. Like I think many people jump to trying to solve problems, but they don't really know what problem it is they're trying to solve. So in this stage, in terms of like spellcraft, what you're really doing is like, I feel like all magic at its root, there is some situation that you would like to be some other situation. Like something's true about the world and you would like something else to be true, right? And so I think that first stage is really clearly articulating to yourself, right? Which I personally find easiest to do in writing. Like really carefully, like understanding the current situation that I'm trying to enchant and also understanding like what about it I want to look different. So that's stage 1, right? Stage 2 is make a plan. And for complicated things, you can't always do that. You can't always like be like here where you are, right? In a situation you don't like. And you can't always see a full path to where you want to be. Because truthfully, if you could, you probably wouldn't need magic to solve this problem in the first place. Like if you could already tell how to get from here to there, you would just already be doing that. I say, but sadly, that is not true. Many people do not just do things. But in principle, most of the time for a complicated situation, you can't see the whole way there. So what you're really going to do is plan to like something that will like get you going in that direction, right? And then plan like, well, but when I get here, I'm going to like pause and sort of reconnoiter, right? And like head back toward it. It's a lot, I think of it a lot like sort of navigating through woods or something, right? And you can see the mountain in the background. That's where I'm trying to go. But then you're going and like you're in the woods, so you can't always see, right? But eventually you like come up to another hill and you're like, oh, I have not been going in the right place. And that is a key ingredient that in life, I think, but particularly in magic, like when you realize that you're going the wrong direction, stop going that direction and make a new plan, right? So phase 2, make the plan. Make the plan usually is where like is what people normally mean when they mean like magical strategy. And in some sense, that is the piece I think that like if you're going to bring in another person, either a collaborator or like you're going to hire somebody, like particularly if you're going to hire somebody where you know, are doing it by the hour, so it gets expensive, like that's the place to do it, is in making the plan, right? You know where you are, you know where you want to go, and you just need some help developing like specific spellcraft to get you there. One way to do that, I think the best way is to have like a big sort of library of like magics that you know in your head, right? Which is also how I would advocate masks, by the way. Like there's a lot of problems I already know how to solve, and I'm going to try and take this new problem and break it into problems I do know what to do with, right? So in magic, you know, you might start off with like a little bit of road opening or like luck generating. I feel like here's like a pro tip. In general, if you don't know what to enchant for, just enchanting for luck is always good. Like all situations are improved by being luckier, right? So that's one thing you can always start with. You might think like, oh, well, these are people I need to influence, so I'm going to do that. And I generally prefer, and this I think is more just like an aesthetic preference on my end rather than necessarily advice. But personally, I prefer to do like a lot of little things rather than like one big giant thing. Right. So I'm really going to like chunk the problem into pieces that I do understand and individually operate on those, usually. Right. So that's sort of the making the plan. And the pieces of that for me are often quite different. Like, I'm like, oh, well, this I've got a pentacle for, and like this I know a thing for, and this I know a thing for. And I kind of do all that. And then usually I reconnoiter again. Because again, if I already knew how to solve this problem, I would not be resorting to like a complex flow chart of how to solve it. Right? Like I would have already solved it.
Right.
But I only know how to solve pieces of it. So I do those, and then I kind of let that go for a while, and then I reconnoiter again. Right. And then, so then the third stage is actually doing it, like enacting your plan. Right. Which, in my opinion, if you've planned properly, is pretty straightforward. Like you kind of have a to-do list, do this, do this, do this, do this. Like, and then, and I think this is the most important piece, is that like afterwards, you have to like go back and like kind of with 2020 hindsight look back and like, oh, I should have, like, this worked, but like all this part I didn't actually need to do any of this was all extra, like that didn't produce any results. It was actually only this little thing that was like the key. And really like aggressively sort of grade yourself about like which parts worked and which parts didn't, because the goal is to never have to solve the same problem twice. Like, right, like you want to really ask yourself like what did I learn from this experience that I can use next time. And I think that's really the key piece, and it's a piece that I think like people aren't always inclined to do because it involves a lot of like acknowledging everything you did wrong. But there's no way to get to being right that doesn't involve going through being wrong. So like you should just expect to fuck up pretty much everything the first time you do it. But if you're not willing to know that, like to know, you don't even have to admit it to other people. You just have to admit it to yourself that you did it wrong. Like if you're not willing to do that, you really can't improve. Some people I find are more invested in seeming right than they are in being right. So when they find out they're wrong, they double down on being wrong so that they seem like they were correct. And I just don't I don't understand that behavior. That's not true. I get it. Like sometimes I do it. I want to save face. Like we all do it, but it's dumb. Like it's counterproductive to learning, maybe even more so in magic, but really, I think just learning anything.
I wonder how much that ties back into the magician as book writer, magician as like being on being a YouTuber, the way we've shifted. I mean, since I've been in my 20s, like everything got to the point of you journal everything online so everyone else can see it. You post it all online so that it's like everything becomes even more public than your private journal being like no one else will see it. Like if you're making faces
No,
like maybe.
Well, I don't know. Here's the thing. Like as I think about it, like I think partly you're right because it is harder to admit mistakes in public. But it's one of the reasons I try really hard to like remind myself that like other people can learn from my mistakes and then they won't have to have this terrible thing happen to them. But the other thing is, so sure it is true because like it's not actually a fact about magic at all or our magic community. It's just like human nature to not want to expose your weaknesses, even to yourself. Like I actually find that like other people knowing I'm wrong hurts less than me knowing I'm wrong. Like once I reconcile myself to the fact that like I'm just wrong, like I did like this was stupid. Why did I do this? And now looking back, it's really quite evident that it was a dumb thing to do. Not always. I mean, sometimes I'm like, no, I did everything perfect. Like what? But usually when I look back, I'm like, oh, that was dumb. Even the things that worked, I usually when I look back, I'm like, oh, that was dumb. I should have done this way better.
Yeah, there was a better way of doing it or a less risky way of doing it, or like it worked.
Once I reconcile my own ego to that, the doing it in public part, I actually find I've already had to deal with that. Like nobody's gonna be as mean to me as I am. So you know?
And I think that's a brilliant place to be in,
Yeah.
like for especially for a magician, for a witch, for a
Right.
magic weaver. Like, yeah, if you can face yourself with it,
Hmm.
yeah, I love it.
I agree. But, I get it. It's hard to look at. Like, I don't want to look at all my terribleness either.
My issue comes with once I've worked out that I've done something wrong or made a mistake on something. Whenever someone talks to me about that thing, I feel compelled to point out, it's like, yeah, but I fucked up here. Like I messed that up. Stop
Hmm.
praising me for doing this. I messed that up. Um, and it's like
Uh-huh. Yeah.
that's ego the other way around, right? To to oh, I did it
Yes.
perfectly even though you're saying it's wrong. Like the other way is going, oh no, I fucked it up even though it worked. Like either way is not helpful.
It's true. I will tell everybody that before we started recording, we spent 10 minutes of me telling Halo how terrible a rough draft of mine she had just read was. And she's like, no, no. I mean, like, it has obvious flaws. Parts of it are not even in sentences, but like, it's good. And I'm like, no, no, it's terrible. Everything about it is terrible. Which,
Yeah,
yeah, we all do that. But
yeah.
that's literally what happened 30 seconds before we turned the camera on.
That is well remembered. Yeah, yeah. Massively enjoyable. Honestly, I can't wait for this to come out into the world. Really. Um,
I'm excited about it, but I don't know if it ever will. Might be just like my secret writing, only for me and
and
you,
me,
apparently.
and me. As long as I get to read it, it's fine.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You get to
So,
read it
thank you
for now.
for now until you get to a point where
You're
you're
very welcome.
anyway, that's a beautiful diversion. But this is the thing about like so strategizing. So you've got like this is where you start with this. You understand the situation, make a plan,
Mm-hmm.
enact the
Mm-hmm.
plan,
Mm-hmm.
review the plan, and admit.
Right.
Right?
Yes. And
Okay.
again, I think phases 1 and 4 are actually where like the real hard parts are. Like 2 and 3, except for very beginner magicians, like you already have like a library of magic kind of in your brain that you kind of know how to do. Right. And if you don't, like that's just because you're a beginner and soon you will. And like, you know,
Yeah.
it that I think that books always focus on step 2.
Mm,
Like 90% of books is like, do you have this problem? Do this. Do you have this problem? Do this. Like recipe books, which I like. But I think that in the real world, our problems are always messier than those little recipes. And so you got to like adapt them to the situation.
yeah. So how do you go about building up that library of magic in your head? Where do you start
So
as a beginner?
I think it depends. The first thing I will say is that like whatever you're good at and into, you should like think about how to use that in magic, right? So if you're an illustrator, like you should always be thinking about like how can I be drawing magic, right? If you're like a musician, you want to think about like how to pull that into your magic because those are like those are things you're good at, so you might as well use them, right? For beginners. Whereas for more intermediate and advanced learners, I think you should always be trying to move away from what you're good at and into the stuff you're bad at because that's where you learn. But
Yeah.
for beginners, I think the best, I personally really love like recipe books, right? Where you just learn this spell for this spell for this. And I like to see them from like all different kinds of places, ancient recipe books, modern ones. Personally, I have a preference for the kind that like explain why. So I find it frustrating when I like read, say, an incense recipe and I'm like, why does this have lemon balm in it? Like, that makes no
Yeah.
sense to me. And there's no answer to that question. Like, it provides no explanation. So, like, when I write recipes, I'm always like, I have a book of incense recipes. I have a book about incense, which is half incense recipes. But by the time you get to the recipes, I've already like talked about each ingredient and like what its virtues are. And then in the recipes, I like explain, like, I picked this ingredient for this reason.
Yeah.
And partly that's because, like, I want the goal for me of a recipe book is to teach people how to write their own recipes.
Yeah.
Like, that's my goal when I write it, which doesn't have to be the goal of every recipe book. It's how I feel about cookbooks. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like as a beginner cook, you like follow recipes really carefully. But as you become more experienced with cooking, you read recipes to like kind of get inspiration and like see how they put things together. But maybe you read like 15 different recipes and kind of like mix them together and make up your own stuff. And I feel like it should be like that with magic too. But, I've eaten food from people who don't know how to cook and skipped to that making things up stage. Unwise. Like
That's
they should have
me.
followed a recipe. But it's how you learn, right?
Yeah. But
Right.
it,
I grew up cooking. So, like, at this
yeah, good.
point, I
Very
pretty
good.
reliably produce edible food. Not always pretty. I feel like chef stuff, that's about making food pretty,
Yes.
but delicious. That part I could do usually.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
when it comes to food, I'm very much of the, oh, this is a recipe. Well, that's great. I've only got half the ingredients on it. I have no idea how to, but I'm gonna try it anyway. Let's see. Oh, that
hey, and I
and
feel like just
sometimes
like
it
with
works,
cooking,
but
if you understand like why those ingredients were
yeah,
there, like what the like I know
then
if
it's easier.
something right, then I can substitute for it. And so
Mhm.
that's how I think that I always try and put that in my recipes when I write them.
Yeah,
Like this is why this is here so that by the time they get to that point, like if they don't have frankincense, they know that probably they can use pine resin, probably they can use this other thing because they understand like what properties of frankincense are being used and why they're in this particular recipe. But substitution tables that I see on the internet drive me crazy. There's this meme, I don't normally like rage post, but there's this meme that says you can substitute rosemary for any other herb in magic. And like, my brother in herbs, you fucking cannot. Like, would you eat if a chef told you that? If a chef came to you and said, "Oh yes, you can substitute rosemary for any other seasoning," would you eat what they cooked? Like rosemary, but I still am like, you cannot substitute rosemary for everything, and it is equally true in magic. Like, I don't know where that. I do know where that got started. I tracked it down. It's from Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Herbs, but he doesn't really say that. He's just like a much more nuanced thing about like you can substitute rosemary in these cases and blah blah blah. Like he does not just flat out say you can substitute rosemary for any other stuff because he would not say that because that is stupid.
yeah.
So if you've been sharing that meme, it's dumb. Stop doing that. And I don't want to be mean, but I feel like if you had thought about it for 2 minutes, you would have known that was stupid because that's not how plants work.
It's like I mean, I come back
That one
to
drives me crazy.
it's bonkers, and I come back to that thing of essential oils because that's I trained as an aromatherapist when I was about 18.
Mm-hmm.
Rosemary essential oil is a stimulant. It
Right.
like it uplifts you. You cannot swap that out for if someone needs chamomile, right?
Right.
You can't give them rosemary because chamomile is a sedative and a
Right.
painkiller, whereas rosemary will help with your memory. So those two things, like chemistry wise, they do very different things.
Right.
Energetics, they'll do very different things.
The reason it makes me upset is because I feel at the underlying, like, what really underlies a claim, like, you can substitute rosemary for anything, is that magic isn't real and therefore it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah.
But like it actually is real and it does matter. And Rose also it's disrespectful to both rosemary and like whatever you were supposed to be using that you said, right? If it called for chamomile and you sub in rosemary, like what an insult to fucking chamomile and rosemary. Like
Right.
those are like our beloved neighbors and partners, and they have opinions on what they're for, and they are not interchangeable. Like you
Exactly.
might
Yeah.
sorry to get that one in particular. My rage at that meme prompted me to write a 300-page incense book. 250. I don't know how long it is. I don't have
Yeah.
one on my desk. Maybe two.
Yeah.
I would say about 250 pages. But like every book I write, it's because I'm mad that nobody has already written it. Like I want that book to exist, and I'm angry that it doesn't. And finally, I'm like, oh, fuck it. I guess I have to do it myself. And then I read it.
Yeah.
But them, I'm angry that nobody else already wrote them.
And that whole thing about needing the why behind it, that's a really important piece for when you're doing magic.
I
Understanding
agree.
the materials, understanding why that material, why those words, why
Right.
this time, because that's what then allows you to actually connect with it properly, engage with it, understand what you're doing, and bring all of yourself to it. Otherwise, you're just going
Exactly.
through the motions. Like, what? And where's the
Right.
fun in that?
that's what I mean. I really do think that like that position of like, oh, it's only your intention that matters. Really, what they're saying is magic isn't real.
Yeah. And it's
Like the magic part of it isn't real. It's just like you make a wishful thinking in your heart, which like is cool, but not actually what magic is. Like magic is real and rosemary is real and it does things in the real world, like biochemical things in your
yeah,
body.
biochemical things and spirit things. The rosemary is a person.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, spirit is really just an old-fashioned word for chemical. Like we still use it to, at least in the States, we still use it to talk about like liquor,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah. We
wine
do
and
here.
spirits.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like spirit is an old-fashioned word for chemical, and that's not like a coincidence.
Right.
Like
It's
those
yeah.
things are deeply related.
And that whole piece, I think there's also a fundamental misunderstanding of what intention actually means. So there's a little bit about like, oh, I intended this. Like, oh, I said something, but I misspoke. Actually, I intended to say such and such. Like that thing about what you mean. But there's also intention in that focusing your mind on something specific. And that's
I
very
think,
different to
yeah.
just going, oh yeah, like that.
I think most of the time when people say intention in magic, they actually mean attention.
Yes.
And like that, if the claim is attention is what really matters, I think it's the only thing that matters, but it is like I actually don't think intention is very relevant at all to magic. I don't think your intentions matter much at all. But attention, I think that does matter. I think that like what we call like energy,
Mm-hmm.
a metaphor I'm uncomfortable with, like it follows attention to the point where it is attention. Like focused consciousness, that is not the only piece that matters in magic, but it sure is like the a key ingredient, like without which magic is. I am unwilling at this exact moment to say that there's no magic without that. I'll think about it more, but at this moment it feels like that really is key, but that's not about intention.
Mm.
It's about like it's an outward focused activity. You are attending to things with quite mm, rigorous focus.
It's the word intent as opposed to intention. I think there's a subtle, maybe it's a linguistic difference, maybe it's an implication or something, but that when you are intent on something, you are focused on it, you are paying it attention, you are like moving towards it. When you are intent on something, you are moving towards it with your whole being. When you are
Agree.
holding an intention, it's like your mind has an idea of something that you'd like to happen. And that
Yeah.
this goes back to something that I noticed about the term charge. So when you are
Sorry, the
charging
term.
charge,
Oh,
so
uh-huh.
like you are charging an object with a spell. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because this is something I've not really talked about. And it's that within pagan circles, we often talk about like charging something up to put energy into it. Like we're charging it like you'd charge a battery. Well, that's one way of doing it. But there's also the charging something, as in you charge it with a job. You charge
Mm-hmm.
like you're giving instructions to something. And it's
Agreed.
kind of an old-fashioned way of speaking. And I think actually
Yes.
that's in the spells that say, oh, you charge your talisman. Not only are you feeding it energy, but you are giving it those instructions. You are charging it with a job.
Yeah, they mean command.
Yeah.
I mean, command has like a lot of sort of social baggage to it that like makes it sound like it's mean, but like it's command the way you command like a computer program.
Yeah.
Like I will say I have stopped using the word charge for that. I'm sure I slip and do it sometimes, but I often use like awaken. Like I'm
Mm.
waking the material up and then I'm going to assign it a job or request it do something. I mean, it depends on like the exact context, but like, right. But I'm waking it up to be a person and then I'm talking to that person.
Yeah.
Because I do think that charge like a battery is a very like materialist and I don't exactly want to say colonialist, but I do think that is like it's a way of understanding the world as if humans are the only people in it and everything else is just like stuff that's there for us to use however we want.
Yep.
And that's just not how I understand the world to be. Like those are our neighbors. Like we share the world with them. There's like a collaborative effort going. And that's why it's so important to like pick the right material because like what you're really saying is that like if rosemary is appropriate in this spell, what you're really saying is that rosemary also wants this thing to happen.
Yes.
Like rosemary's intentions are in alignment with your intentions,
Yeah.
right? And like if that intent is to say like help you study for a test, like rosemary's fully on board with that. But chamomile is not at all on board with that. Like she did not sign up for that. She would like to be taking a nap right now.
Yes.
And that's what she thinks you should be doing too.
Yes.
Right. And that's, I think, really the secret sauce of choosing like materials, but also choosing like what spirits to work with and etc. Like, I don't even really like the word material here, but like, I don't know what else to say. Like, ingredients in a spell. Like, really, you're looking for ingredients who have a vested interest. Like, they also want this thing to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why it's important to know them, like, and know what they want.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
And this, I like this whole piece really reminds me of that. Like my goal in all of this is to re-enchant the world for those of us who have fallen into a materialist place.
I agree, but can I push back for a second?
Go for it.
I don't feel like the world needs re-enchanting. I feel like humans
Yes.
need re-enchanting. The world remained fully enchanted the
Yes.
whole time. We just opted out. Like we were taught, especially like those of us who grew up in English speaking cultures in particular, we were like taught pretty aggressively out of that. Like
Oh yeah.
we had that beat out of us. But you know that that's the natural way of relating to the world because that's how all 4-year-olds relate to the world.
Yeah.
Like all 4-year-olds are animists until it is punished out of them or like socialized out of them.
Yeah. And I
right. So we don't re-enchant the world. Like the world re-enchants us. Like we just wake up to it. Is how I think. But I say it. I try and police my language to like remind myself of those things, but I forget and say it backwards all the time.
I mean, I 100% agree with you. And
Yeah.
I come from like my philosophy background, the particular strand that I'm within, the world, has a technical terminology that influenced where part of where I sort of why I settled on that. And that is like re-enchanting the world is about re-enchanting our experiences and remembering, like getting behind. So the world in this context is the model that we've built up. I wouldn't say re-enchant for the same reason, and I 100% agree with you. And like use whichever way around the language makes most sense. Absolutely, but I wouldn't say re-enchanting the universe because like that's for that reason.
Interesting.
And I was quite lucky to be brought up, and actually in the way that I was brought up, like my mum, my teachers, like my family indulged my obsession with fairies, which was the best term I could find for the spirits that I saw and for the animist world that I experienced. And like that was a socially acceptable like obsession for a small girl in southwest England, right? Wouldn't have been other places, wouldn't necessarily have been for like some of my male friends at school in particular, or you know, but that, and this is one of the reasons that I kind of come back to stories and fairy stories in this, in helping us to remember that rosemary and chamomile are people too, that the trees are people too, that the rocks are people, that the world is enchanted, and we just, as you say, opted out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also like grew up in a family where like that was acceptable in a way that it was not acceptable for my neighbors. Right. And like you know, dad maybe thought it was a little silly and I would grow out of it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't opposed to it. He's not like, oh, none of that witchcraft. Not like, he just thought it was like maybe a little bit silly and I would grow out of it, which I did not. I definitely grew into it. But like
Yeah.
my mom, my late mother did not appreciate the word witch being applied to her, but she didn't exactly deny it either. She would have said more that, like, she was a very effective wisher
Mm.
and that kind of thing. So, like, I too grew up in a way where, like, it was weird. And, like, the other kids, and as I got older, like, it definitely got less acceptable. Like, it was definitely baby stuff. And at a certain point, like, by high school, I understood I wasn't supposed to still be into that. But also, that was not even the weirdest thing about me. So, like, by the time I was 13 there was a phase where I tried to fit in, but I was spectacularly bad at it. Like, I, even today, really can't pass for normal once not for long.
Yeah.
Like, for maybe an hour. I get through a job interview, but I cannot get through a job pretending to be normal. Like, so I just given up when pretending to be normal, and I was just doing my own weird shit. And that, worked out. And other weird people. Like,
Yeah.
I was, in some ways, maybe I was usually the weirdest one, but not the only weird one. And everybody was weird in their own ways.
Yeah.
And, weird is an old fashioned word for, like, I guess fate. I feel like we don't really have like, weird with a Y. I feel like we don't
Mm.
really have a word for that in modern English, but it's somewhere like fate and somewhere like magic. And it's weird that in our culture, those seem like opposites. That, like, either
Mm.
something is fated to be, or like you did magic to, like, avoid fate. But I think that's like a weird, unenchanted way. That's not how anything works.
Yeah.
But I do think that, weird retains that character somewhat in English that I quite like.
Yeah. I love the term weird, uh, particularly with
Mm-hmm.
a Y. I mean, my friends will like if the word weird comes up in a sentence, one of the four of us, like, will turn around and go, ah, but how are you spelling that?
Right?
Right.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Maybe uncanny. I guess
Hmm.
uncanny is the closest to that word we have in English, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I
I don't
yeah,
know.
I
I
don't
feel
know.
like there's just no way to say that in modern English. I think about
Like,
this a lot, that the entire history of the English language, we have burned to death anybody who talked about magic out loud. And that leaves English with a real paucity of technical jargon for talking about. Like, it's actually quite hard to talk about magic in English, especially because I do a lot of translation. There's like 50 words for wizard in Hebrew, and they all mean different things. And
yeah.
we just don't have any of these. Like, it's hard to talk about magic in English because we did not permit people to do that for a long time. And that's why we end up, like, borrowing terms from other cultures that don't really fit. And, like, I often just resort to, like, fairy tale language, which I do think is our best. I think childlike wonder is where magic still lives in English,
Yeah.
right? And do I sound like an idiot talking about magic as if I was talking to 6 year olds? I mean, maybe, but I don't care. Like, I long ago gave up on caring if people thought I sounded dumb because I'm not dumb. So I'm not that worried about it.
And
Also,
that
I randomly swapped from talking like I'm talking to a 6 year old to doing it in, like, ancient Hebrew and Greek. So it,
yeah, so
evens
people
out.
are like, oh yeah, no, there's that nerd shit, clearly a scholar.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have to, like, establish my nerd cred. I actually can't hide it. Like, when I'm trying to not be a nerd, I really can't pass as not a nerd either.
Yeah. And it's one of those pieces I love being weird for weird spaces, even like that
Agree.
point where you're like, I'm sorry, there's multiple thoughts going on in my mind at the moment, and one of them is that when you start communicating like with that wonder of the 6-year-old, the
Mm-hmm.
reason that I'm actually quite comfortable doing that, and one of the reasons I imagine you are, is because the people in the room hear that and they light up because something in them
Mm-hmm.
recognizes it, because it is some of the best language that we have.
Agree.
So, but yes, it's that being academic and being woo. I sometimes find I'm too woo for the I'm often too woo for the academic spaces, and I'm quite often too academic for the woo spaces. And it's treading that kind of line of translating between them.
Same.
Yeah. And actually that's okay. I don't think you mind
I'm
either.
quite happy in those liminal spaces.
Yeah. It's
No, I
fun.
mean, I fit much better in the weird spot between like academic and woo than I do in either of those. Like I was in academia for a long time, and even in math, which is a high weird kind of academia, because here's the thing, when you're an academic in like literature or history or philosophy, I think, because I also spent time in like academic philosophy, like I worked for a philosophy department at university for a while,
Mm.
and like there's definitely a like, especially as a young woman, it's pretty easy to get like painted with a like flaky brush.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody, you can't really be flaky and a mathematician. Like you've, by the time you're in academic math, you've pretty much established that you're not a flake, which in some ways gives you like a lot more leeway to be weird. Like I don't know if anybody knows mathematicians, but like having spent time in academic math, actually be hard pressed to think of a mathematician I know who isn't like deeply fucking weird. But I was still too weird for that, especially for like the like bureaucracy of academia. But in woo
Yeah.
spaces, my position that like no things mean things, and it's not like I don't always feel welcome in super woo spaces either. So I'm very happy to have found this magical liminal space with you.
Likewise.
Yay.
You're I so what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that we actually take a little bit of a break. We've not been going for quite an hour.
Oh, that seems sensible.
Yeah, but I have finished my tea and actually need to go and refill my cup. Um, so I
Understood.
think, and I don't want to stop this conversation. So what I'm going to suggest is that we call this the end for today for our podcast, and then you and I meet back and hit record again in a moment. And
I like that too. Can I assign
we'll
people
start
a
again.
homework
I would love
between
that.
like this podcast and the next one? Okay, so let me think about this. I didn't think of something. Um, okay, so here is your homework. It's to think about like when you read fairy tales as a kid, like which character or like scene was the one that you were like, "Oh, this is real. Like this is not just a story, like this is real." So think about it and then think about like how to bring that exact piece into your magic and like come back with an answer, and then we'll talk about what to do that in the next episode. I'm so
That sounds
old. Issue.
beautiful.
Okay, excellent. I am also gonna go get more drink. I'll be back in like 2 minutes.
Wonderful. So, for our listeners, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been Tea with Sara, and you can find Sara's work in the meantime at witchlessons.com. Just as you can find the Enchanted Academy at theenchantedacademy.com. I'll put the links down below. Do your homework. You can come and comment on the video. You can come and find us where we've shared this episode and say, well, I'm thinking this, if you like. But join us next week, and we're going to talk about what to do with that newfound wisdom that you have uncovered from your fairy tales. Until next time, stay enchanted.
Bye, everybody.